I will go and translate a birth certificate for someone, and then that person will send you a photo of the baby that they had with a Brazilian partner, and then they will update me and say, I managed to bring my family to the UK thanks to your work.
Hello, and welcome to another series of I Taught English Abroad, a podcast by the TEFL org. It's our third series of interviews with prominent and upcoming figures in the TEFL world, covering topics like travel, starting a business, presenting yourself online, exploring your potential, and, well, obviously, teaching. Once again, we're your one-stop shop for the best advice and stories when it comes to teaching English as a foreign language. Now, we were very, very excited about this episode. Lachesis Braick, also known as The Teacher, that's with 2 R's, is a Brazilian teacher from Belo Horizonte whose work has taken her from schools in Brazil to the Ministry of Justice in the UK via a veritable smorgasbord of teaching, interpretation, and translation roles. Lachesis tells us all about her unlikely inspiration to start learning English, combining her passions of law and language, and what the challenges are for non-native English speakers in the TEFL world. Here's her story. So, Lachesis, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to have you on. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I'm very well.
You're the first person we've spoken to from Brazil, and Brazil and South America in general is such an underheralded, underrated TEFL location. But obviously, you've come kind of the other way from that, and we'll get into that during the podcast. So, if you could just tell me a little bit about your upbringing, were different languages really important in your family, and what was it like learning English in Brazil? How popular is English there?
Well, first about my family. No, I would say that it wasn't quite that important for my family. I was actually the first person in my immediate family to have a passport and to want to travel and that kind of thing. But I think I've always been curious about reading, and I was the fastest reader at preschool. And when I started to learn how to read, I think I became really curious about words in general. And we would always have this issue where I would ask an adult, oh, what does that mean? Like, or I would try to read that letter combination and it wouldn't work. So they would say, oh, that's English. But then I had my dad who could speak English, so he would then go and explain to me what that meant. So it ended up evolving to me getting to my tweens. So when I was 10 to 12, I started to really like the Backstreet Boys.
Excellent.
And my plan was to marry Kevin. No, to marry Nick first, then divorce Nick and marry Kevin. I had it all figured out. Nick was
Of course.
the one with the nice hair, and Kevin was like the actual nice guy. And so I just became really obsessed about it. And I think when I joined an English course when I was 11, I'd already been asking my mum for a long time to enroll me. But when she finally allowed me to have that opportunity, it really showed me something that I was just naturally good at. And I think it's wonderful for anyone to find out something where you enjoy it and you're good at it. And it was the case throughout my entire experience with English. So I think the experience came more from me than from, an interest that was from my family. And it's quite interesting to think that at 11 years old, I already knew what I wanted to do. Well, not in very specific terms, but something that I could be good at. And it makes me really think about how young we are when we actually find our flair. And I think it happens to a lot of people as well. But about Brazil, there is an interest. A lot of people want to learn. I think that, I'm 35 now. So you're looking surprised.
I am surprised, but yes, go carry on.
Yeah, so I'm 35 now, so there were fewer people who were learning back then, but there's always been an interest. We're heavily influenced by American culture. And I think that having cable TV and that kind of thing made me even more interested because now I could compare the subtitles and I could do all these things and I could try and see if I could understand every single word and watch the same shows over and over again. It's quite difficult for a lot of people to learn the language because of cost. And so we have a very small population of people who are fully fluent in English. Someone said to me, please correct me if I'm wrong, any listeners, but someone said to me something around 2 to 5% of the population can speak fluent English. So that's a huge opportunity as well because the education we have at school isn't that great. Um, but I wouldn't say it's a country like the Netherlands or Germany where you have a higher population of young people who can speak English well.
So, talking of school, actually, so it sounds like so much of your interest in English and your progression in learning English was self-directed. Is English one of the languages that gets taught at schools in terms of, what foreign languages are taught in Brazilian schools typically? Obviously, it's a massive country, and I wouldn't want to make a generalization, but from your experience, I mean, were things like Spanish, Italian, were these offered at school, or how did that work?
No, 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 certainly not Italian. English is the number one, I would say, and I went to a public school, which I actually mean state funded, not
Mhm.
public school, as in for the posh kids.
It's weird how we do that here, yeah.
I know. I mean, we do have classes and we do have both English and Spanish. In some schools, you can choose. But the problem is the size of the groups is usually very large. And if you go to a state funded school like myself, you will not get the best teachings and the best infrastructure. So, through just attending lessons in school, it's very unlikely that you will learn English. So, many of the wealthier kids will either attend courses or get private tuition. And then, of course, they have further opportunity with travel and that kind of thing as well.
Certainly, I mean, it opens doors, as the language of business and whatnot. It's an interesting point you actually made earlier on, and I want to pick up on that a little bit. You knew from a very young age what you wanted to do, which is it's a rare and wonderful thing. And you became a teacher at 19, if I'm right. In your first 6 years of teaching, you worked in a range of different schools across Belo Horizonte. What was it like adapting? Because you're a young teacher, you're working across multiple schools. Was that kind of the best first experience you could have had because you're really testing yourself in different environments?
Well, so I knew what I wanted to do at 11, but I also was very heavily influenced by, the environment. So I actually had other interests as well, which I thought represented me better, but then I realized that they didn't. But we can talk about that later. About the school environment in Brazil, it I when I started to teach, I just wanted to earn a little bit of money. I was starting law school at a federal university, which is a very good university, and I wanted to take the time off from law school and just teach some classes and everything. So that's how I joined my first school. So it wasn't anything very professional, and certainly that wasn't a very well organized school. It wasn't a business per se. But then I ended up evolving to really enjoying teaching English. It was something that was easy for me in the sense that I think I've always been very interested in people and in learning about them and in relating to them. So, as a teacher, you get a lot of opportunity to do that. And for me, it was quite special because it allowed me to share something that I was very good with people, that was something that I was very good at, with people who were not necessarily that confident about it. And it dawned on me that being good at teaching meant you had to make something that's very easy and simple for you, just as easy and simple for someone else. So you have to try and predict what they're doing. And I think that that motivated me to get much more into teaching than just for that surface level, that's how I'm starting. But the frequent change in schools that I had was due to financial reasons. So unfortunately, and it's funny because before moving to the UK, I thought the system we have in Brazil is awful. The UK is going to be 5,000% better. I find it very tacky to go above 100%, but in this case, I will, because I thought it's going to be more than 100. It's going to be amazing. It's so developed and everything. But I realized the systems for language schools seems to be a copy and paste across the board, and worldwide. I mean, I don't know about other countries. This is just like my very limited experience. But for me in Brazil, it was very difficult to have that as my main source of income, because they hired you per project. It, I mean, they said you were like one of the teachers working for the school, but essentially you got hired to deliver a project, which meant it was quite difficult to afford the January and February bills, because that's when everyone is on holiday, and we have carnival as well in Brazil. So things only start after carnival. The hourly rates were never that great. Sometimes you had a private student and then they would stop having class, so you had that gap in your schedule and therefore in your income. And so it always became difficult for me to remain with the same school, because they didn't really have a guarantee of anything for the next academic year. So I didn't even know if I would keep the same number of classes that I had from, the previous term. And so that triggered me to send CVs. I love sending CVs, by the way. I think it's the solution to a lot of problems in life. So whenever I saw that the term was coming to an end, or if a student stopped having class or something like that, I would just send out hundreds of CVs. Sometimes I would print them and go and hand them in person. So that ultimately meant I worked for quite a few schools, but I think that working for schools in Brazil isn't something that's going to offer you a level of income that will put you in a comfortable situation. And I think what I remember the most from that time is the financial struggles. But I also do remember my students quite fondly, and I think that I always enjoyed spending time with them. I had a lady who got in touch with me, and she said, "Do you remember me, teacher?" And Brazilians will call their teacher. It's a term of endearment, and I said to her, "I did. I've taught you quite a few years ago, didn't I?" And she said, "Yes, I was your student in 2009." And she was reaching out to me in 2022. She still remembered me, and she thought, "I want to go back to learning English." And I liked you so much that I remembered your name, because it's quite difficult. So I found you here. And for me, that was fascinating, because I wasn't as experienced. I'd been teaching for, say, 2 years. Somehow I felt like I made a difference in a lot of people's lives, and that's always been really important for me.
Absolutely. And again, this is perfect being a podcast guest because you've led me perfectly onto my next question. You've helped people get their IELTS qualifications, their TOEFL qualifications. Just how much do they help people in terms of their career, in terms of moving abroad, gaining confidence even? Is it one of the most satisfying parts of your career today, even, given all you've achieved? But in those early stages when you're helping people get through those qualifications, or even just figure out that they've got an enthusiasm to learn English, is that, do you look back on that as some of the most rewarding times, even with what you've achieved since then?
I think that the qualifications per se are not that important for me as a teacher,
Oh, okay.
because what it is just a piece of paper that proves that you've been either a very good or somewhat good or really solid test taker. And it might not really reflect the level of knowledge that you have. Certainly with TOEFL, we see a lot of really competent English users scoring low, and people who are not that great getting the same grades. And it's because the test is very difficult. Standardized exams, a lot of the time, do not provide us with an accurate result of what someone's skills are. I think what I've enjoyed about working with exam prep is knowing that that person will use that for an experience that's probably going to change their lives, which is, going to a foreign country to study in an academic setting, or getting a scholarship for a university or something like that, or, things that are tangible and that can really make a difference. Um, but for me, the most important thing with my students has always been to leave them with something that will stick with them forever. So I think that the biggest value in education is empowering people to view the world in a different way, to feel more confident about something that they found difficult or tedious. So for me, that's the most important thing, every knowing every time I have an interaction with a student and I'm a part of their lives, I'm trying to make a difference for them, and it matters to me that they progress. I think that that's the most important. In terms of achievements and what you can do with TOEFL and IELTS, as I always say to students, yes, they are difficult tests, and yes, you can use them, but they also have an expiry date. So there's no point in preparing to sit an exam like that if you don't really have any clear plans to use them in the near future. And I don't think that your level of English will improve by preparing for those two tests, because what you will preparing for is strategy that you need to show the level of English that you already have. So the best way to improve your English is to try and work on things that will make your English better. And a lot of the time, I think it requires this self motivated attitude that some learners, especially with private classes, find really hard to get, which is, researching things that you were interested in, trying to watch something that you like, looking for things that you would like to say or that you would like to hear from people. I think that that's what gets people to the highest level that they can. It's not the fact that they had this or that teacher. I don't think that necessarily makes you better. Um, Quite a few people ask me about my background in Brazil and, who taught me. And I don't think I've ever had a native speaker for a teacher in Brazil. They were all Brazilians.
Wow, okay.
So, and I've seen cases of students who had native speakers for their teachers, and they struggled with the same things that students who have a Brazilian teacher would struggle. What I think makes the most difference is just how committed you are with having that as a part of your routine and a part of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're just going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Feeling inspired? Fancy trying something completely new? will make your best move yet by signing up for a TEFL course with the most highly accredited provider on the planet. Here at the TEFL org, we offer a range of online and classroom courses that you can study at your own pace. All of our courses include top-of-the-range teaching materials and come with dedicated tutor support from experienced and highly qualified TEFL experts. And what's more, we'll give you money off to do it. Just enter the code PODCAST at checkout to get 50% off any of our internationally recognised TEFL courses. And that includes our best-selling 120-hour Premier online course. With that code, you'll not only get 50% off, but you'll also get a free lesson plans pack. Within a matter of months, you could be a qualified TEFL teacher, out there exploring the world, or working to your own schedule from home as an online English teacher. Just use the code PODCAST at checkout to get started.
And we're back. So we often hear from teachers who are from the UK that set off elsewhere to teach. You know, the UK being an English-speaking group of countries. But you did it the other way around, which is particularly interesting. So what was it about the UK that really inspired you? Because obviously the Backstreet Boys are American. So
Exactly.
What was it about Britain?
Well, I've always enjoyed going abroad and that kind of thing. And my thing with teaching back home was that I realized teaching in schools would not be my best option. And I remember at one point I was living in a flat share with these three girls, and everything was very untidy, and I was just tired of it. And this girl, I did have private students, but I charged them per hour on the day of the class. If you're a private teacher and you're listening to me, let me tell you, this is the worst thing you can do to yourself. It's a disservice because it creates much less commitment. So at first, I didn't really think teaching privately could be a proper business because students were not as committed, I guess, you know. Um, and then there was this one girl. She wanted to have private lessons once a week, and I'm still in touch with her, by the way. She moved to Ireland, and she's got a beautiful family there now. Her name is Talita. It's very lovely to see how she flourished. And she was my first student. And I sat down with her and I said, if I give you a contract for, say, 6 months, would you accept it? And, I have a background in law, so I know how to draft contracts. And at the time, my father, he revised the whole contract for me, and he was like, my father was a barrister, and he was like, this is this and this and this and this is what, well, a barrister is in like a Brazilian lawyer who specializes in court work. He was not a barrister as in a UK barrister, but anyway, he was very good at these things, and he revised everything, and he said, this is good. You've had like a couple of typos here and there, but it's acceptable. You can give this to your client. She will not sue you. So she was really committed, and she was just a really nice person. Maybe I'll show this to her so she remembers,
Sure.
so she
Right.
knows I still remember her very fondly. The students I got who would pay me per hour, they didn't really see that was my main source of income, and that really mattered to me. They thought it was just some extra. When I got this student, she was ready to really commit. It's a bit like going on dating apps and going out with a lot of guys who say they want something casual, and then all of a sudden you find someone who says, no, I actually want a relationship. It was a bit like that. And then I worked out how much I could charge from her that would be a bit higher than what the school paid me, but it would also be less than what she would pay for a private teacher or in a school. And that would be and then I worked out how I could get a 1-bedroom apartment in a part of town where you didn't need to pay for parking. and like just a very simple kind of place where students could come and have class with me. And I thought, if I get this one and I'm not sharing a house, it's going to cost me less to live alone than to live in a flat share and go to people's houses. Why not do that? And she was okay with it. So I thought, in 6 months, I would try and get one more. And then that means, and it would be more than what I got paid to teach a whole group of 16 students. The school where I worked at the time paid more if you had a private student than if you had a group.
Right, okay.
I don't know why.
Yeah, it's odd.
It's odd, I know. And I was just so drained. And I remember at that point, I found out how much students were paying for that tuition. And I realized with one student attending the class, they could cover, my wages. So everything else was profit for them. And the hourly rate was very low. I think this was the entrepreneur being born in me. I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I still working with them? Why? I'm not going to do that. So this student of mine, she really motivated me, and she was great. She was great with payments. She was very polite, and then I started to advertise, which at looking back now, I think I was a bit annoying because I would be that kind of person who would send messages to everyone, send things on like their inbox and that kind of thing, email, trying to get more people. But I realized the best way to do it would be to start posting tips. So whenever I wanted to get more students, I would start posting a lot of things on Facebook. And then gradually, also because I gradually stopped working for schools, more and more students started to reach out to me. And sometimes it would be a referral or someone I'd taught 5 years before. And it got to a point where I had people waiting outside of my place for me to finish my class, and then the other student could come, and then they would, because it was a bit like this flat, like the kitchen and living room were all together, so I didn't really have a waiting area. So I moved to a bigger apartment, and then in the bigger apartment I had a place where they could sit and everything. And that was also a very interesting moment in my career because I had issues with a couple of students, and it was issues with them complaining about my prices, which I hadn't changed. But I think to some of them, it was like, she's making too much money because she's living in this like nice apartment. Like, I had 3 students who caused me a lot of issues for that, but I was very organized and very professional with my contract, and that was it. But it was quite that was quite an interesting time. I had one lady who, she was very nice to me when I had the very small place, but when I moved to the nicer one, she started to complain about lots of things, and then she decided to cancel. And when she said she wanted to cancel, I explained to her that there was a cancellation fee of 10% on the installments to come, so on the total that she still owed on the contract, and that would have been the same if I had been the one canceling the contract. So I tried to make things as equal and fair as possible for both parties. And then her daughter sent me this very lengthy email, and I'd never met her daughter, calling me. She called me a word which is fulana, which is like, you little insignificant thing. And she said I would always be a poor person, and that I was living in this apartment, but that I was certainly piled in debt and that kind of thing. And I thought, oh my God, her mom must have commented with her that I'm doing better now. But I mean, I come from a not very wealthy background. I wouldn't say I was very poor, but I wasn't the richest person, and I was starting off without financial help from my parents. So of course you start from the bottom. And it didn't offend me at all, but it was very difficult to manage that at the time. And she ended up paying me the cancellation fee, and she moved. And I used to suffer a lot with students like that, with someone who would want to change the rules, or someone who wanted to reschedule a lot of classes and that kind of thing. And my mom is amazing. She should be a motivational speaker or a coach, because she would be like, you always get more students. I don't know why you're crying over this one that left. She would say this thing that she made up, which is aluno é igual biscoito, vai e vem oito, which is something that rhymes in Portuguese, and it's something like students are like cookies. If one goes, then you get eight more. It's more for the rhyme. And she would say that, and she would always be very motivational about it. So I think even though she knew nothing about English, she knew nothing about teaching, she didn't have a clue what I was doing with this little business thing that I was doing. She was someone who motivated me a lot and who
Yeah.
was a very good companion. But then what happened to my business was it got to a point where I didn't see much room for growth. I mean, I started filtering out the bad students, the ones whose values were not aligned with mine, or the ones who were giving me too much trouble and that kind of thing. And I think if you're starting off as a private teacher, it's normal to have students like this one I told you about, or to have people who are not very committed. I mean, when I first started, I had students who I would travel 1 hour to get to their place. They were paying me a very modest hourly rate. And then when I got there, they would say, oh, today I'm not going to have 2 hours of class. I'm only going to do one. But then it wasn't worth the travel. This was before online teaching. So I think it's normal to come across these people, but the more well established you are in the profession, I believe the more you will be able to find your niche, and you will be able to find good clients. And people tend to associate with similar people. So if you have one good client, it's likely that they will refer you to another good client, and then it becomes a virtuous cycle. And I think that that's what happened. But for me, there was this thing that I wasn't enjoying as much, which was I was only getting more students and developing more courses. I bought a portable e-board so I could take it to the companies where I taught. I was very sad to hear the company who made it went bankrupt during the pandemic, but it was a great thing. Students loved it. It was so technological, but I wanted to explore other things, so I ended up moving to the UK.
And I mean, there's so many lessons in there. If you're a private tutor, people are going to be strange about the fact that you're actually doing well from it. That's a new one. I hadn't really expected
Well,
that.
private teachers themselves find it weird that you can build a good career and earn good money. And I mean, I actually think I was living more comfortably in my hometown in Brazil with what I earned and what I could afford as middle class there than here in London.
But lots of opportunities came up in London, including one that's. I mean, we'll touch a wee bit more on this sort of side of your career later on. But you worked as a translator for the Ministry of Justice. Now, I have to ask, how does that kind of opportunity come about? And obviously, with your background in law, that plays a factor. But was it more kind of intimidating dealing with a difficult client, or translating something for the Ministry of Justice? Just tell us about that experience, because it's incredible.
Well, so just a correction, I don't do translation for the MOJ, I do interpreting. A lot of people say the two are the same, but it's different because translation is. But I also work with translations, but more with quality control and with, translating documents myself. I think it's a very different relationship that you have. The issue I find with private English students, especially the ones that stay with you for a long time, is the fact that you end up building a relationship that goes beyond teaching a class with them. And you have to manage this relationship for a long time, sometimes for years. That can be very positive, but it can also be very draining. If you've got issues with things like payments and that kind of thing, it won't be something that will happen on a one-off basis. It will happen multiple times. Or if you're still a person who reschedules classes, which I think is a very difficult thing if you have a busy schedule, but if you still do it, it means they might be finding their way into your personal life because they want to reschedule a lesson, but you can't. And there's just like the admin bits, because if you're a private English teacher, you are both secretary and the teacher. Oh, and you're also the academic, the DOS, and also, well, you're pretty much everyone at the school. So I find so that can be quite difficult. Um, and it can be difficult to set boundaries, especially if students really like you and they see that you're friendly and everything. With the MOJ, most of the interpreting I do is with the police and the courts. So I find I mean, it's difficult, but in a different way. It's difficult because sometimes I handle people, who've either committed a crime or who've been a victim of a crime. There's lots of really heavy things involved. And then you have to manage working with legal professionals and court staff, and it can be difficult to manage people's sense of self-importance and that kind of thing. But the ultimate, they call them the service users, but I hate that because I find it very impersonal. Let's say the customer, the person who's using the interpretation services, I've, touch wood, never had issues with any of them. But I think that my background with teaching and with building a relationship with students for so many years, and the issues that I've had, has really taught me how to set boundaries and how to be firm with them. And I think that when I started this career, it wasn't that difficult. But then I also do conference interpreting, and that puts me a lot of the time more in a position of negotiating with the client, and then they want a discount, and then there's the same kind of issues that you would find with private teaching. But I don't think any of these things is difficult for me to a point where I wouldn't want to do that. I like working with people, and I like offering them something that they wouldn't be able to find themselves. And I think that the two careers have that point in common. One of the most beautiful things I find about doing, for example, certified translations is I will go and translate a birth certificate for someone, and then that person will send you a photo of the baby that they had with a Brazilian partner, and then they will update me and say, I managed to bring my family to the UK thanks to your work, or I managed to get married to the person I love because of the document you've done for me. So there's this component that's very important for me, which is caring for people. And I think that this is at the core of everything I do.
I mean, that's got to be such a huge. I mean, it's got to be so impactful in terms of if especially if it's a Ministry of Justice thing, or if it's a policing thing, or if it's something like birth certificates, that kind of thing, you're there as a sort of friendly face and voice, and someone that someone can speak to in their native language. That's got to be a massive source of comfort for people, and you're there at very important parts of people's lives. We're just going to take another quick break, and then we'll be right back discussing even more of Lachesis's incredible career.
Are you looking for a weekly guide to what's going on in the TEFL world? Do you want some advice on everything from job interviews to underrated TEFL destinations? Well, the TEFL.org blog has it all. Every single week, we tackle some of the biggest questions in the TEFL industry. Stay up to date with the latest trends in English teaching, find tips to make your next job application your best yet, or get inspired and read about the experiences of TEFL.org graduates teaching all around the world. Whether you're brand new to the industry or you've seen it all, we can guarantee an interesting read each week. To find out more, go to tefl.org/blog. That's tefl.org/blog.
I just want to kind of touch on the experiences that you had as, the whole non-native versus native. I don't want to call it a debate. I think that gives it too much gravitas. But there was another teacher I was speaking to for this podcast who talked about the implicit kind of contradiction with this sort of argument about native and non-native teachers, because learning a language as a foreign language, you learn the nuts and bolts of it. You learn why grammar is the way it is, why punctuation is the way it is, tenses, all this kind of thing. I mean, would you agree with that, in the sense that, like, being a non-native English teacher actually gives you advantages from an academic point of view, because you've learned in English in a way that you have to teach it, whereas native teachers have to sort of kind of learn a lot of the principles of the language that's native to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you know one thing that was quite interesting was when I started to teach a student Portuguese, not English. So I inverted positions and I became the native speaker. And my student wants to learn Portugal's Portuguese, not Brazilian Portuguese, which is what I speak. But then I thought, I've been teaching people who are going to Australia, Canada, everywhere. And I've never questioned my ability because I wasn't from that country. And they've done well. So I decided to do the same thing I've always done, which is use materials that you find online, like Facebook videos. I think are amazing. You can show people any kind of accent you want and speak to him in my accent. And we've been doing this for a few months now. He has not got a Brazilian accent. He's got his own accent, which is beautiful, by the way, but he's learning to speak in his own way. That made me think a lot about what we perceive as an advantage with the person having one background or the other, which I think is a lot of the claim behind having a native speaker for a teacher. I don't believe it will automatically influence the quality of your English. And I also don't believe having a non-native teacher will automatically have you learn the English better because you're covering certain topics. I think that what we need to do is go beyond where the person grew up, because that's not a qualification, and really see how much they're investing in what they're doing and how good they are at imparting knowledge. It's not just a matter of how much you know for yourself, it's how you're passing it on to your student. And I think that when we get into this debate, or whatever we want to call it, we lose sight of that. And that's what matters.
No, I just wanted to ask about, because, I mean, part of the way that I find guests for this podcast is looking online and looking at who has a really excellent internet presence, and that's something that you very much tick that box. You've built this formidable online presence as the teacher, 2 hours if you're wanting to Google, but blogging, vlogging, building your own website, and also teaching. Now there'll be people who are watching this who are either native or non-native speakers. It doesn't matter, but they're keen to do as you've done, and maybe they don't feel like they have the time. I just have to ask, because of everything that you've achieved in your career, but also having this amazing online presence. How do you do it? What would you tell people who are they're worried that there aren't enough hours in the day?
If you're posting things online, it needs to be something that add value to that person, and it needs to be something that's free. You could send them a tip on how to improve their English, or share a meme or something like that, and then you will get more people to see you. I've built both my websites. I have one for teaching English and my other one for interpreting and translation. And I know nothing about coding. I know nothing about web design and that kind of thing. I actually wanted to pay someone to make the websites for me, but I realized I draw a blank when I have to type out everything I want to do and then send to someone else. So I just paid Squarespace, who, by the way, do not sponsor me, but I just paid them to get a template, and then you can edit the template and you can change the pictures and that kind of thing. I think that that's what I've done. I've always, like, for example, now I'm trying to get more interpreting clients. So I went and wrote a couple of blog posts about what it's like to go for an interview at the American consulate in London and what you need to do and everything. And I've had a couple of people calling me and requesting my services because they were looking for that online, and then they realized, oh, actually there's this lady who's teaching all of this for free, and she's left a phone number. And then they would call me. And what I find really important is I always try to, when people reach out to me, I always try to answer their messages, to reply to their messages, to speak to them, and to be kind and friendly, because I think that that brings good business. I also think getting reviews is a very good strategy too. So you can get people to come and review your work with Google or something like that. That's what I've been using a lot now with my interpreting work. But I think the most important thing is just not thinking that if you didn't get a lot of likes or if you didn't get a lot of views, that that was an unsuccessful post, because a lot of the time someone 3 years later will look that up online, and then they will find you, even though you didn't get a lot of views on that post, even though you only got a couple of likes. That's only one side to using the internet for advertising, and I think it can be really productive. All clients I'm getting now for the jobs I'm doing are just through getting reviews from clients, and then they just go and post something. And it's also really nice to ask people to review you, because it makes you realize that they notice things about you that you hadn't really thought they had. I had that a lot with my clients, and they often comment about how I go the extra mile and I make sure that they're comfortable and that kind of thing. And for me, that's very important.
And I'm just sort of wondering, because a lot of people are going to listen to this and they're going to be really inspired by what you're doing and how you've come across here. I just wondered if there was anyone who inspired you that blazed the trail, and was there anyone who served as a role model to you, especially getting into teaching?
I think what drove me to want to be a teacher wasn't seeing other people who were teachers, especially because I didn't think I would do that as a career. I didn't, it wasn't something that I had as an ambition. It was only later on that I realized that there are certain skills which are very much teacher skills that made me really like it. And I think that what we get in school about professions is so superficial and is so limited that a lot of the time we don't really know what skill set you need for being a teacher. And I think when you're young, you also don't know yourself. So it was only later on, but I've certainly had teachers who've really inspired me, like Rob Tesh. I think he's absolutely amazing. I had a teacher as well. She's called Olga, and she was my teacher when I was 11. When I had, my crush with the Backstreet Boys, she was my teacher. She was very patient with me. I was a very difficult little girl. But I think what inspired me the most actually is the bad teachers I've had,
Okay.
because you feel disengaged. And whenever I was in a classroom, I would have this, especially when I first started, I would have this thing of thinking like, please don't let me be like that guy. Please don't let me be like the person who made me cry in maths class. And then I would start comparing them with like someone who did the same thing but very well. Like I had a lot of difficulties with, I call it the delta thing. Remember the equation with the delta?
Yeah, I think so. I was terrible at maths, but I think I know what you mean. Yeah.
And then I remembered, I remember that I had a lot of problems in school, and I kept crying over the phone with my boyfriend at the time that I was not learning and blah blah blah, and no one could teach me. And then I had this lady called Alice, and she was a mathematician, and she sat down with me, and I remember her asking, "What is it that you're finding difficult?" And I told her, "I don't understand where the delta comes from. I think it's like a second degree equation. Is that what it's called?"
You're asking the wrong person, I'm afraid. This is.
Anyway, it's one of those.
I'm sure you're
And
right.
then I explained to her that with the delta and the x and where was all of that coming from? And then she told me a whole story about where the term delta had come from. I don't know if she made it up or if it was a real story, but I just loved it. And then I was like, but why do I just put the numbers in there? And then she said, well, you don't have to do that. We can verify it. So she had like 4 pages of equations, and she went like little by little. And then she had me do it a couple of times as well. And I understood everything. And at the end, she said, now you have two options. Every time you have to do something like that for a test, you can do the same thing we've done with the 4 pages of numbers, or you can memorize the formula and pass. And I think for me, the most important thing was understanding that it was called delta, but it could be called anything. So she made it easy for me to understand something that was very easy for her, but she could see where I was coming from. I like that very much, and I think we lack teachers with that skill. So whenever I'm teaching, I'm constantly asking myself, am I doing the same thing as that really bad physics teacher who made me hate teacher forever? I think that the damage a teacher can do is very high, and I think it's a lot of responsibility.
It is a lot of responsibility, but now you're going to be a role model to so many people who, especially people who want to come to the UK and teach English. And what would you say to young non-native English speakers who have had the same kind of experience that you've had? They want to teach English, but they maybe aren't sure that there's a space for them in the TEFL community. I mean, obviously that's it's rubbish, but it's a prevailing myth. What would you say to people who don't think that they have the passion to teach English, but they just don't think that they fit into the picture? What would you say?
I think the first thing is just making sure you have the right level of English for teaching. It doesn't matter how passionate you are. Teaching, in my view, is not a gift. It's something that you build. It's a skill. So you're not just born amazing at it, and it's not a call when you're like, I mean, it can be really rewarding, but it needs to be rewarding to yourself as well. You need to have things like, good compensation, teaching something that you actually enjoy and that kind of thing. So I think looking at the motivations that you have for teaching is very important, knowing that you're at the right level, that you're not going to be teaching students wrong language really matters. And apart from that is if you're not sure if there's a space for you in the market, then you need to work on yourself and build your self-confidence and your self-esteem so that you can really show your students what you have to bring to the table. Like I said to you, in my experience with Brazil, the most successful teachers are Brazilian. So it means if you're a Brazilian person teaching Brazilians, you are more likely to get students than your native speaker counterparts, and you will have an understanding of the culture, and this is valid for other countries as well. You will have an understanding of how people do business and that kind of thing that maybe someone who's not from that country doesn't have. And I've never tried to convince students to have class with me. So if they say, oh, but I would like someone who's American, or I would like someone who's British, I've never tried to argue against it, because I think that people should have that as an experience to see what it will bring them. It might be a positive thing. They might think this is great, and it might be a good teacher, and it might be exactly what they needed. But whenever I've been given an opportunity, I've always tried to do my best to be the best teacher I could be, not to be better than anyone else. So I think it's important to really work on yourself, and to realize that if you want to work as a private teacher, you will have to be an entrepreneur. You will have to learn to speak to people about money. You will have to hear things like that, like, about native speakers and everything, and not let it get to you. And I'm saying that from the standpoint of someone who didn't really even apply for things in the UK for a long time, thinking maybe there wasn't a space here for me. But I think that this also has to do with these limitations that we impose on ourselves, and sometimes we don't even see that we're doing that.
It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. There was so much we could have covered over this last hour or so, and it'd be great to get you back on. But where can people find you? Where can where can people find your resources and your stuff online?
So I'm on Instagram, at lachesis.braick, and I've got 2 websites. I'm happy to share them, and I have a Facebook page as well. And if anyone wants to ask anything, if they want some tips, or if they want help with anything that they think I can assist them with, I'm happy to help them as well.
Well, I mean, I don't know where you're going to find the time, but I'm certain that you will. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Likewise.
You've been listening to I Taught English Abroad, a podcast series by the TEFL Org. To keep up to date with every episode, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your streaming platform of choice. And we love feedback, so feel free to leave us a review on any platform you like. For more information about the TEFL Org, or about teaching English as a foreign language in general, head on over to tefl.org. That's TEFL.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.